I was in the garage, which, contrary to popular belief, wasn't where I went to escape my wife. It was where I kept things Melissa didn't want in the house, like my bowling trophies, my old comic books, and the recliner she said smelled like retirement. I was elbow deep in a box marked Kevin's Junk, Do Not Touch, trying to find my cordless drill, which had gone missing the same day Melissa decided she wanted to reimagine the laundry room. I'd already found 3 empty picture frames, a ceramic frog from my mother's yard sale phase, and an unopened set of coasters shaped like pizza slices. No drill. That's when I noticed it. An envelope jammed between an old stack of magazines and a half-deflated beach ball that had somehow survived 3 garage sales and 1 attempted donation. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, and addressed in the sort of handwriting that people who own fountain pens think is impressive. It wasn't addressed to me. That was, admittedly, the first clue. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, here it comes, the cliché discovery, some love letter tucked away like a guilty whisper. But no, it was worse. Way worse. The envelope contained a collection of letters. Not one. A series. Each sealed. Numbered. Like chapters in a romance novel nobody asked for. Except this one didn't star Melissa and me. No, this featured a gentleman who referred to himself, without irony, as your Jupiter. Jupiter. I sat there, on top of my high school yearbook and a bag of expired grass seed, flipping through a handful of sealed envelopes addressed to my moonlight. That was Melissa. I only knew because she had once made me call her that during a phase where she thought she was into astrology. It lasted a week, ending abruptly after I gifted her a birth chart I had printed from a novelty website, and she discovered her Venus was in Capricorn. Apparently, that meant she was doomed in love. Jupiter, God help me, was poetic. He wrote in looping metaphors about intergalactic connection and orbits of passion. One line literally read, "Even Saturn's rings couldn't bind me like your laughter." I audibly gagged, not because of the betrayal, but because I was embarrassed for him. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I wasn't angry. Not immediately. I was confused. I mean, first of all, mail? Who even writes letters anymore? I live in a world where people use emojis to express grief, and here was my wife having a pen pal with cosmic aspirations. I didn't storm into the house, yelling her name like some scene from a made-for-TV drama. I did what any rational, utterly flabbergasted man would do. I made a spreadsheet. Column A, date of letter or estimated date, based on postmarks and faded ink. Column B, notable quotes. Column C, mentions of planetary bodies. Spoiler alert, Mars was heavily featured. I was on letter 7 when I found the twist. Melissa hadn't just been corresponding with this Jupiter fellow. She'd been meeting him. That part wasn't in the letters. No, that bit was tucked into an old shoe box Melissa kept behind her yarn collection in the linen closet. A shoebox I hadn't seen in years, mainly because I hadn't been suicidal enough to open the yarn closet since the incident with the mothballs. Inside the box were receipts, handwritten notes, and this is where I truly lost all faith in human subtlety. A signed first edition of Leaves of Grass with "To My Moonlight. Walt would have envied us," scribbled in the margin. I don't know what was worse, that he used a Walt Whitman reference to woo my wife, or that she apparently fell for it. So I sat there, staring at evidence of what appeared to be an extramarital affair written in cursive and stuffed between coasters and yarn. And all I could think was, Melissa always said I wasn't romantic. Turns out I was just using the wrong planets. You'd think that would be the breaking point, that I'd have some grand emotional collapse right there on the linoleum floor of my garage. But instead, I laughed. Because of course my wife was cheating with a man who called himself Jupiter. It was so on brand for her, I almost respected it. Melissa, for the record, didn't know I'd found anything. She came home that night humming a tune from a musical she pretended to like for the sake of appearances. She kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, like someone might pat a mailbox. I smiled back, channeling every ounce of passive Midwestern energy I had. "How was your day?" she asked, opening the fridge like she hadn't detonated the foundation of our marriage with a ballpoint pen and interplanetary metaphors. "Oh, the usual," I replied, sipping from my glass of iced tea like a man who hadn't just discovered that his marriage had a supporting cast. "Found a shoebox full of love letters in the garage." "You." She blinked, paused, tilted her head like a cat hearing a strange noise on the wind. "I don't follow." "Of course not. Why would she?" Melissa never followed anything unless it was on Pinterest. I didn't push. Not yet. I wanted to see how deep the rabbit hole went. See, there's something liberating about knowing something the other person doesn't know you know. It's like being handed the director's script while everyone else fumbles their lines. For the first time in a long while, I had the upper hand, and I planned to enjoy it. You know what they say, revenge is a dish best served with a straight face and impeccable timing. I wasn't going to confront Melissa in a parking lot or throw Jupiter's poems in the fireplace. No, I had something better in mind. Melissa liked routines, not in a cozy, comforting way. More like in a my coffee better be at 137 degrees or I'll make a spreadsheet about your failure kind of way. Mondays were laundry and clean out the fridge days. Wednesdays were spin class and buying things from online influencers who promised enlightenment through houseplants. Thursdays were when she ran errands, which loosely translated to left the house for 6 hours, returned with one candle and an expression of moral superiority. Now, I never questioned these routines because I valued peace, and also because I once tried asking why a $30 candle was necessary and ended up listening to a TED Talk on scent psychology and personal worth. But the Thursday in question was different. Not because Melissa didn't come back with a candle, she did, but because she came back early. By her standards, early meant within the same calendar day. She walked into the house carrying a tote bag that probably had its own insurance policy, tossed her keys onto the counter like she hadn't just come from a seminar on emotionally sustainable cheeses, and said, "Hey, can you help me with something later? I need to sort through those boxes in the guest room." That was odd. Not because she wanted help. That part was miraculous. But because those boxes hadn't been touched since the Obama administration. They were labeled things like books I might read and seasonal decor, Thanksgiving, with enough question marks to suggest even she wasn't sure what was inside. Melissa didn't just decide to organize for fun. That would imply spontaneity, which ranked just below camping and cable news on her list of personal horrors. So, naturally, I said yes. And that's how, 3 hours later, I found myself in our guest room, elbows deep in a box marked Kevin's stuff, spare room trash, wondering when exactly my belongings had been downgraded from sentimental to refuse. I was pulling out tangled chargers, a high school ID badge that somehow made me look older than I do now, and a VHS tape labeled July 4th Barbecue, Don't Erase, in my handwriting, when Melissa walked in holding a small plastic bin. "I think this was yours," she said, dropping it next to me like a judge delivering a sentence. "It's your old tech stuff. I found it in the laundry room closet behind the paint samples." I stared at it. It was, indeed, my bin. A graveyard of devices that were obsolete before TikTok existed. Old phones, dead batteries, a digital camera that used actual film like it was still 2003. I hadn't seen this thing in years. Why was this in the laundry room? I asked, because asking questions Melissa didn't want to answer was my second favorite hobby. She shrugged. "I must have moved it while reorganizing." Right. Melissa reorganized like politicians apologize, rarely, and with an agenda. Still, I didn't push. I waited until she left the room, humming something that sounded suspiciously like a passive-aggressive musical score, and popped open the bin. Now, here's where things got inconvenient, for her. There it was. My old backup phone. The one I used during our bathroom renovation when I accidentally dropped my primary phone into a bucket of grout. I hadn't touched it since. But for some reason, it was sitting at the top of the bin, fully charged. Which was weird, because I don't remember charging it. Melissa, on the other hand, has a mild obsession with making sure all electronics in the house are battery-ready in case the power goes out, and she needs to document our suffering for social media. I powered it on, mostly out of curiosity. Most of the apps were outdated. Messages? Empty. Photos? Mostly blurry shots of drywall, and one picture of me holding a hammer like I was being forced into manual labor against my will. I was about to shut it off when something caught my eye, a notification from an app one didn't even remember installing. A calendar reminder titled Lunch with K. Now, I don't know many people whose names start with K, besides me, and I certainly didn't remember scheduling a lunch with myself. Though to be fair, I had taken myself out for pancakes once after Melissa said she needed space, and then proceeded to rearrange the spice rack for 4 hours. I opened the app. It wasn't my calendar. It had been logged into a different Google account. An account linked to my phone, but not mine. One that had a picture of a nice little cottage as the avatar. Except we didn't own a cottage. We owned a house that Melissa routinely complained had too many corners. I'm not a tech genius, but I'm not a complete relic either. It didn't take long to figure out the account was hers. And somehow, through whatever series of events I could only assume involved her misplacing her phone and borrowing mine, she logged in and never logged out. The email address alone was pure gold. moonlight.mel83@somethinggorther.com. Subtle. The calendar was filled with recurring events. Not dentist appointments or yoga classes. Things like afternoon meeting, do not disturb, and client consultation, BR. All during times I thought she was out buying oat milk and meditating in overpriced chairs at the co-op furniture store. But here's where it gets good. There were notes attached to some entries. Notes with location pins. Notes with initials. Notes that included phrases like, bring charger, and remember to delete texts. I wasn't mad. I wasn't even hurt. I was fascinated. It was like watching a bad reality show where the contestants try to hide their alliances and inevitably get caught because they're all bad actors with no editing software. I screenshotted everything. Not because I had some grand plan to confront her with it, but because I knew she would eventually try to deny it, and I needed the receipts. Literally. The highlight, though, the real piece de resistance, came when I checked the trash folder of the email. Inside was a draft. A half-written message titled, "To my Jupiter," dated 3 weeks ago. It started with, "I hate how fake everything feels when I'm home." Charming. At this point, I didn't even need to investigate further. I had enough to confirm that Melissa's Thursday errands weren't about picking up fair trade detergent. They were about picking up a different kind of load, one delivered by a man who thought he was a planet. Did I confront her that night? Of course not. I waited. Not because I was scared. Because I wanted her to dig deeper. To lie more. To make a scrapbook of excuses I could flip through later when I needed a laugh. I wanted to see what else she'd say when she thought I was still the clueless, tech-inept husband who couldn't tell the difference between a calendar app and a microwave clock. I played it cool. Watched our nightly shows. Asked about her day. Nodded when she said she'd be super busy next Thursday. Smiled when she said she might visit her cousin in the city, who, for the record, had moved to Arizona 6 months ago. And while she was carefully crafting her next poetic exit strategy, I was creating a folder on my computer labeled Operation Moonlight. Because if she was going to write a story, I figured I'd write the ending. There's something weirdly satisfying about watching someone lie when you already know the truth. It's like watching a magician mess up a card trick, but they still go through all the dramatic hand waves and fake smiles like they're fooling anyone. That's where I was with Melissa. Every word out of her mouth had turned into an improv performance, except she forgot that the audience had already read the script and left bad reviews. By now, I had screenshots, timestamps, locations, and enough digital breadcrumbs to bake a very disappointing marriage cake. I hadn't brought it up yet, not because I was emotionally paralyzed or philosophically processing betrayal. No, I was just waiting for the right setup. The kind of setup that practically asks for a punchline. And it presented itself on a Saturday afternoon, which Melissa designated as house productivity time. That meant vacuuming half a room and then pretending to organize the bookshelf while actually just scrolling through home organization influencers who all apparently live in beige prisons. She was in full performance mode, alphabetizing the non-fiction section for the 3rd time that year. I sat across from her, fake reading a user manual for a printer we no longer owned, which somehow still had more substance than our recent conversations. I started with a casual question. "Hey, Melissa, do we know anyone named Brent?" She didn't flinch, which was a little disappointing. I was hoping for at least a brief existential twitch. Instead, she said, "Brent? That's vague." "Brent who? I don't know," I replied, turning a page I had no intention of reading. "I just keep seeing the name around. Feels familiar." She shrugged. "I don't think so. Maybe one of your work people." Ah yes, the classic redirect. When in doubt, throw it back at the husband who once confused Slack for a dance move. "Maybe," I said. "Might be. Or maybe it's someone from your calendar. You've got a lot of meetings lately." That got me a blink. Just one. Barely noticeable. But it was there, like a glitch in a PowerPoint presentation. "What are you talking about?" "I mean, I was trying to check the date for the garage sale," I said, lying with the confidence of someone who had watched 12 seasons of courtroom dramas. "Your calendar popped up. Must be synced with the cloud, or whatever." Saw a bunch of events. Brent popped up more than once. She smiled. Tight. Plastic. The kind of smile you see on flight attendants who just watch someone try to open the emergency exit at 30,000 feet. Well, I do meet with clients. I've mentioned that. You have? I nodded. And Brent is a client? Pause. Deep breath. Flick of the wrist as she adjusted a book that didn't need adjusting. Yes, she said, like she had just decided that answer. He's new. I probably didn't mention him because the project isn't locked in yet. I nodded slowly, impressed by the speed of her mental gymnastics. If lying were cardio, Melissa could cancel her gym membership. Cool. What kind of project? Just branding. For a boutique firm. I let that hang in the air like a forgotten punchline. Then I went in. Is that why he wrote you poems? She didn't speak immediately. She didn't look up. She adjusted another book. Then another. The whole shelf could have been upside down for all she cared at that moment. Poems. Yeah. You know. All that cosmic nonsense. Jupiter, moonlight, Saturn's rings. Felt more like bad sci-fi than romance, honestly. Silence. Not dramatic silence. Just a flat, quiet absence of anything resembling a plan. I continued. You left your cloud account logged in. Rookie move. All your notes were there. Calendar invites, drafts, deleted emails. It was like reading fanfiction written by two people who think the universe owes them something for using scented candles and having opinions on cheese boards. Still nothing. You know, I said, closing the manual I hadn't read. If you wanted to leave, you could have just said so. I wouldn't have stopped you. I might have even packed you a bag and included your top 5 lies ranked by creativity. Melissa finally turned to me. Her face didn't have tears. No trembling lip. No apology. She just looked at me the way someone looks at a checkout screen after realizing they forgot their promo code. So what do you want? She asked flatly. A fight? No, I said. I want clarification. Just out of curiosity. You had this whole planetary love affair, and instead of doing anything remotely logical, you decided to leave breadcrumbs like it was a treasure hunt designed by a bored intern. What was the plan? I didn't think you'd notice, she said. That was the first honest thing she'd said in weeks. Well, I did. And I gotta say, Jupiter's got a real thing for stationery. You two should consider writing a self-help book. Cheating with class. How to schedule adultery with Google Calendar. Could be a hit. She exhaled through her nose, the international signal for, I'm pretending this is beneath me, even though I'm panicking inside. You went through my things. I laughed. Oh, that's rich. Melissa, you moved my boxes to the laundry room like they were radioactive. If you're gonna leave clues around the house, don't get mad when someone connects them. I didn't plan it, she muttered. No, you planned it badly. There's a difference. Another pause. Then she did something I didn't expect. She shrugged. Okay, she said. So now you know. That's it. I don't know what else you want from me. This was the part where most people might launch into some philosophical breakdown of the relationship, the vows, the memories, the betrayal. But I wasn't most people, and this wasn't a soap opera. I wasn't looking for an apology, and she wasn't looking to give one. We were two people standing on a rug she had yanked out from under us and now expected me to vacuum. What I want, I said, is to see how you explain this without sounding like a motivational speaker who got caught stealing office supplies. She didn't reply. I didn't expect her to. I stood up, grabbed my user manual, and headed toward the stairs. You can keep pretending this was all spontaneous, Melissa. That it just happened. That Jupiter fell from the sky and landed in your arms. But next time, try logging out. That night, we didn't talk. She stayed downstairs. I stayed upstairs. There was no shouting, no tears, just the sound of two people silently updating their mental calendars with the realization that whatever version of us had existed before had been quietly deleted, without a backup. I wasn't interested in screaming, smashing plates, or any of the nonsense Melissa probably anticipated after the grand reveal. That would have been too easy, too expected, and frankly, too exhausting. I didn't want catharsis. I wanted precision. You can't fix betrayal with drama, but you can make it really inconvenient for the person who caused it. Now, to clarify, I wasn't out to ruin her life. I just wanted her to experience the joy of consequence, an underappreciated feature in modern relationships. Since she'd gone to great lengths to turn our marriage into a personal side quest titled Find Yourself and Jupiter, I figured I'd offer her a supporting role in the sequel. Kevin fixes the narrative. Step 1 was subtle. A harmless-sounding favor. "Hey, Melissa," I said, mid-morning on a Sunday, flipping through a stack of documents on the dining room table that looked far more financial than they were. "Can you take a look at our shared expenses spreadsheet? I think we need to reevaluate who's covering what." She looked up from her laptop like I'd just asked her to recite a poem backward. "Why?" "No reason. Just seems fair, with all your projects lately." The sarcasm didn't land, or maybe she ignored it on purpose. Either way, she mumbled something about being busy and walked off. Perfect. Step 2 required more creativity. See, Melissa had always been very particular about image. Not deep-down morals, just surface-level aesthetics. Her online presence was curated more carefully than a museum exhibit. Her friends believed she was thriving in a marriage full of hand-holding, matching pajamas, and carefully posed brunch photos. It would have been a real shame if that version of Melissa accidentally encountered reality. So I helped it along. I started small. Slight shifts. I replaced the framed photos in the hallway with printouts of Google Calendar events from her second account. No context, just the titles. Meeting with K. Lunch, 2 p.m. Evening plans, J. She noticed by the second day. "What happened to the pictures?" she asked, standing in the hallway holding a frame like it had betrayed her. "Just freshening things up," I said, trying to make the house reflect the people who actually live in it. No response. Just one of those tight-lipped expressions she reserved for moments when she wanted to say something clever but was out of material. Then came the printer incident. Melissa had set up a shared folder on the home network where she stored presentation files, receipts, and half-finished newsletters for her community group, who all believed she was basically a walking self-help poster. I added a new file to that folder called JupiterAlignmentPlan.pdf. Inside was a collection of quotes from her deleted emails, presented in a nice little layout that made them look like a branding pitch. I even included clip art. I figured if she wanted her affair to be about self-discovery and transcending traditional relationship boundaries, I'd give her something worthy of a corporate retreat. She found it. Oh, she found it. I heard the printer fire up around 3 p.m. and 30 seconds later, a very distinct silence filled the house. Not the comfortable kind. The awkward, someone just realized their webcam was on kind. She didn't bring it up. That was part of the game now. Passive confrontation. Psychological tag. I'd throw a jab. She'd pretend not to notice, and the tension would balloon like a neglected party decoration at a 6-year-old's birthday. I kept going. Our shared streaming account. I renamed her profile to Moonlight Betrayal and added Jupiter-themed documentaries to her watch list. Not because I thought she'd watch them, but because I liked knowing that every time she opened the app, the algorithm would think she was into planetary affairs. Fitting. But my favorite part, the real masterpiece, was the newsletter. Melissa had spent the last 3 years organizing a monthly email for her circle of lifestyle-obsessed friends. Recipes, quotes, vaguely spiritual anecdotes. It was a carefully balanced cocktail of self-importance and digital scrapbooking. I'd always helped with formatting and scheduling because apparently, nothing says masculinity like adjusting line spacing. That month, the newsletter went out as planned. Except, this time, nestled between a section on seasonal squash and a review of locally sourced candles, was a segment titled, "When Your Moonlight Has Mood Swings, Navigating Betrayal with a Smile." It wasn't explicit. It didn't mention names, but it included excerpts. Little gems like, "Sometimes the people who say they love you are just looking for someone to practice lying on." Or, "A double life isn't impressive when the second one is just bad poetry and sneaking around." A few days later, she stomped into the kitchen holding her phone like it had physically insulted her. "Did you touch the newsletter?" I looked up from the sink, where I was attempting to unclog the garbage disposal with a level of commitment that bordered on spiritual. "Did I what?" "You know exactly what I mean." I shrugged. "You mean the segment about betrayal?" "No, that was probably auto-generated. AI's getting clever these days." She stared at me, gears visibly turning. She knew it was me, but saying it out loud meant admitting everything. Not just to me, but to her whole brunch club of curated perfectionists. She looked like someone trying to decide whether it was better to fake amnesia or just move to another town. Eventually, she walked out without saying a word. Later that week, I got an email from one of her friends. It wasn't addressed to me. It was clearly a mistake. Melissa had forgotten to change the recipient when forwarding a message. The subject line read, "Is everything okay with you and Kevin?" That newsletter section was something. That's when I knew I had her cornered. Not publicly, not with some grand announcement. Just enough pressure to force her into the one place she never wanted to be. Somewhere she had to explain herself. Because Melissa was fine with secrets. She just didn't like being seen as someone who had them. Now, I wasn't planning to stay in this situation forever. I'm not a martyr, and I don't believe in turning betrayal into a long-term living arrangement. But before I left, I wanted her to understand one thing. If you turn your marriage into a joke, don't be surprised when the punchline isn't yours to deliver. Melissa finally asked me to talk. Not because she was ready to be honest or brave or whatever word people throw around when they're caught and suddenly think they deserve a trophy for speaking in full sentences. No, she wanted to talk because the walls were starting to close in and I had, according to her, created an atmosphere of passive hostility. I told her I preferred the term consequence simulation, but sure, we could call it whatever made her feel more poetic. She scheduled it, naturally. Sent me an Outlook invite like this was a corporate exit interview. Subject line, Kevin plus Melissa, real talk. Location, living room, no distractions. I almost brought a dry erase board and a laser pointer for dramatic effect, but I figured I'd let her have the illusion of control. She started with posture. Sat on the edge of the couch like she was preparing to announce a fragrance line. I sat across from her, leaned back, arms folded, expression somewhere between customer service at 4:59 and jury duty. I think we've both been under a lot of pressure, she said, with the confidence of someone who once watched half a TED Talk on emotional intelligence. And I just want to clear the air. Great, I said. Start by clearing the part where you dated a man who calls himself Jupiter. She flinched. Slightly. Not enough to count as regret. More like acknowledgement that the branding wasn't as cool outside of Google Docs. I'm not proud of what happened. Didn't look ashamed in your calendar notes. Melissa exhaled, a long, theatrical breath like she was the one being inconvenienced by my existence. I made mistakes. I don't deny that. But you've been efficient, I offered. Tough. That was rich. Melissa, if you think this is rigidity, you should see my patience. That one's an even bigger show. She stared at me. Not with anger. Not even with guilt. Just that blank, glazed-over look she used to reserve for watching me explain how taxes worked. I don't want to keep living like this, she said. Then stop, I said. There's the door. Take your tote bag of lies and your planetary pen pal and go reinvent yourself in someone else's narrative. I didn't say I wanted to leave, she said quickly. Right, of course. Because you'd rather keep the house, the car, the furniture, and the husband you don't respect as a fallback plan in case Jupiter gets hit by an asteroid. That's not fair. Neither was the newsletter, but you got through that. She stood up, started pacing, which was her go-to strategy when she needed to look thoughtful without doing the actual thinking. I don't want to throw away everything we've built. You didn't seem too concerned about that when you were syncing your betrayal to Google Calendar. That's not what it was. You're right, I said. It was worse. It was boring. All that build-up, all the secrecy, and for what? To sit in a car somewhere talking about cosmic soul connections while using words like vibe unironically? She sat back down, clearly realizing the pacing wasn't leading her anywhere useful. I could see her weighing her next move, like maybe if she picked the right tone, the right blend of remorse, and just enough victimhood, I'd roll over and pretend the last 6 months were just a glitch in the simulation. Look, she said, switching to the voice she usually used on customer service reps. I'm sorry. I made a bad decision. I was feeling lost. I didn't feel appreciated. And you thought the best way to fix that was a secret romance built on poorly written metaphors and digital breadcrumbs. I didn't plan it, she muttered again. That line's getting old, Melissa. At this point, you should embroider it on a pillow. Then I leaned forward. I'm not angry anymore, I said, which is probably worse for you, because anger is loud and messy and leaves room for fixing things. But I'm past that. I'm in the cleanup stage. The part where you realize that what's broken doesn't need glue. It needs to be put out with the recycling. She went quiet. I can change, she said finally, voice lower now. Less polished. You probably can, I said. But you won't. Not in a way that matters. You're not built for hard things, Melissa. You're built for curated experiences, filtered moments, and whatever philosophy you read on a mug this morning. I never meant to hurt you. That line's as useless as the compost bin you bought and never used. So what now, she asked. Now, I said, we move on. Separately. You get to tell your friends I turned cold and distant. I'll let them believe it. You've always been better at writing the script, anyway. She looked at me, eyes glassy. Not quite crying. Just unsettled. Like a person who finally realized their backup plan had a mind of its own. I don't want to lose you, she said. You lost me when you scheduled deceit like a dentist appointment. I stood up. She stayed sitting. I'll move out, I said. Not because I'm guilty, but because I don't want to spend another day playing roommate with someone who thinks closure comes in bullet points. She didn't stop me. She didn't beg. She just sat there, probably rehearsing how she'd retell this conversation later. Maybe I'd be the cold one. Maybe she'd say I was never emotionally available. That's fine. Let her have her story. I had mine, and mine came with screenshots. I moved out on a Wednesday, which felt like the most aggressively neutral day of the week. Monday was too dramatic, Friday too theatrical. Wednesday had the right energy for quietly rolling a suitcase past someone who still believed facial toner could fix character flaws. Melissa wasn't home. That wasn't by accident. I had asked her the day before if she'd be gone for her usual wellness workshop, which translated to paying a stranger with an internet certificate to explain why lighting a candle counts as personal growth. She said yes. I nodded like someone who didn't have a U-Haul app open in another tab. Packing took less time than expected. Turns out when you remove the guilt and disappointment, your belongings become surprisingly portable. Clothes, books, a few gadgets, and my small collection of objects Melissa had deemed unnecessary clutter, which I now proudly referred to as proof of personality. I left a note, not because she deserved one, but because I knew the absence of a note would bother her less than a note written like a performance review. I kept it short. Melissa, everything important to me no longer lives in this house. Please don't call. Let's both pretend we're mature enough to handle silence. Kevin. No signature flourish. No dramatic postscript. Just a plain, unsentimental log-off from a situation that had turned into a season finale nobody asked for. I rented a small condo 2 neighborhoods over. It had scuffed floors, weird light switches, and a view of a building that looked like it gave up on being an office sometime during the Bush administration. I loved it. No coordinated throw pillows, no passive-aggressive reminders about joint vision boards, and best of all, no Melissa. That first week alone was quieter than I expected. Not lonely, just quiet. I slept better. I breathed easier. I didn't get a passive lecture about the correct way to load a dishwasher by someone who hadn't washed one since the Bush senior administration. It was nice. I changed my phone number. Not because I was afraid she'd call, but because I wanted to deny her the chance. That small act alone felt like cutting the cord to a toaster that only ever burned everything you put in it. People talk about closure like it's some philosophical event, but sometimes it's just deleting a contact and remembering how your own voice sounds without background correction. Mutual friends asked questions. Some of them texted. A few even tried to meet in person, probably hoping for some dramatic sob story they could file under things to bring up at brunch. I gave them nothing. Not because I was stoic or above it, but because explaining Melissa's behavior required either a therapist or a pie chart, and I had neither. One of her friends, Tara, I think, did message me to say, I just want you to know, Melissa is going through a lot right now. I replied, so is my garbage disposal, but it still works harder. She didn't respond after that. Pity. Eventually, I got around to building something resembling a new life. Not in a grand, motivational poster kind of way. I didn't take up pottery or backpack through foreign cities. I just lived. I started saying yes to small things. Grabbing coffee without scheduling it. Reading a book without thinking about how it would look on a shelf. Sitting in silence without being asked if something was wrong. I even went back to bowling. Not because I was passionate about it, but because nobody there cared about curated energy or alignment with emotional goals. They just wanted to knock down pins and complain about their knees. It was refreshing. Melissa never reached out. That part surprised me. I figured I'd get at least one email, probably with a subject line like reflection and honesty, followed by 300 words of vague regret and one quote from someone with a podcast. But nothing came. Maybe she was too proud. Maybe she knew I wouldn't respond. Maybe Jupiter finally crashed into her real life and turned out to be more of a mood board than a man. Doesn't matter. I didn't forgive her, not in the traditional way. Forgiveness implies there's something to salvage. What I did was accept. She made a choice. A series of them. And now we both live with the result. People ask me what I learned from the whole thing, like it was a seminar I attended. I tell them this. If someone starts talking about finding themselves, don't ask where they're going. Ask what they're trying to leave behind. If they need constant validation from strangers, make sure you don't end up being the one who validates their excuses. And if they ever call themselves Moonlight unironically, run. Now, my life isn't some self-improvement montage. It's still boring most days. Bills come in. My socks still disappear mysteriously. The sink still makes that noise I keep pretending not to hear. But it's my boring life, and I like it better than whatever performance Melissa was running. So, that's the story. Not the fairy tale. Not the tragedy. Just the version where the guy walks away not bitter, not broken, just done. And honestly, that's enough. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel